Okay, so here are the two equations for sine and cosine function. A, if you remember that we use that to find the amplitude, and amplitude affects the y coordinate. B is used to find the period, which is going to affect the x coordinate. Remember I told you there's two that are going to affect the y and two that are going to affect the x. We've done two that are going to affect the y. We've got to now find the other one that's going to affect the x, and that's phase shift. C is used to find the phase shift, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then D is used to find the vertical shift. And phase shift affects the x coordinate. Vertical shift affects the y coordinate. So again, phase shift is a movement left or right. If our phase shift is negative, that's a movement left. If it's positive, it's a movement right. And then to determine the phase shift, we use the opposite of C over B, that equation. So
it was like plus 3 where the C is, it would be, you put negative 3.
Yep, you put the opposite. So if it was minus 3, you would put a positive 3 in the top. Yep, it's the opposite, not necessarily, it's not always going to be negative. So if we read that as the opposite of C over B. So we're going to look at now, today we're not going to do any graphing. We are just going to be looking at equations and identifying the 4 possible changes we can make to our the base function of sine and cosine. So we're going to be stating the amplitude, period, phase shift, and vertical shift for each of these equations. And then tomorrow we'll look at doing the graphing for that, for what we're doing here. The D can be at the end or at the beginning. So this 4 is D, right? So we could actually move the 4 to the end. So we could rewrite this, and it could be, well, we're going to put that 4 at the end. So the D can appear before, at the beginning of the equation, or at the end of the equation. But it's still, whatever it is D. Okay, but we're not talking about that right now. Let's talk about amplitude. Let's go in order. Amplitude is what's being multiplied by the function. What's the coefficient of our cosine function in this case? It's a half, right? Are we going to flip? No. So there's our amplitude. Period. Again, we will take 2 pi over b. And theta is the same as x, right? It's the same. It's just the variable. So here, what are we multiplying by theta? 1/3. So we're going to divide by, b is 1/3. So we're going to take 2 pi divided by 1/3, and that gives us 6 pi. So that's the period. To find the phase shift, I'm going to do that over here. So phase shift, we take the opposite of C over B. Right. So right now, C is a negative 5 pi over 6. So that we would be doing the opposite of a negative 5 pi over 6, which is a positive 5 pi over 6. Divided by B, and we said B over here was 1/3. So we're going to divide by 1/3. So that becomes positive. When you divide by 1/3, that's the same as multiplying by its reciprocal of 3 over 1. And that's going to give us a phase shift of 5 pi over 2. It's positive, so that means going right. Right? Did I do that right? Divided by 1/3 is the same as multiplying by 3. 3 goes into 6 twice. So 5 pi over 2 is your phase shift. And then our vertical shift is just 4, which will be 4 up. So there we've identified all the important parts of our changes in our function. All right, let's do another one. We are going to identify the amplitude, period, phase shift, and vertical shift for this function, which is y equals 3 sine of quantity theta over 4 plus pi over 6 minus 2. So just going down the line, amplitude is going to be 3, because that's what's being, no flipping because it's positive. Period, we take 2 pi divided by b, and in this case b is 1/4. So that's going to give us a period of 8 pi. Phase shift, we take the opposite of c over b. C is a positive pi over 6, so we're going to make that a negative pi over 6. And then we said b was a 1/4. Yep, because that'll be like multiplying by 4 over 1. And then we'll be able to reduce that to 2 and 3. And yes, it will be negative. So the phase shift is a negative 2 pi over 3. And then our vertical shift is just down 2, or we could write it as negative 2. Two more. Okay, try this one on your own. Amplitude, period, phase shift, and vertical shift. And then we'll work on it together, and then I've got another one I want to show you. Okay, amplitude is going to be what, Jacob?
2 flipped.
2 flipped. Period. How are we going to find the period destiny? What are we going to do? What divided by what? 2 pi divided by 3. Do we need to simplify that any? Nope. We're good to go on that. Awesome. So phase shift. Phase shift gauge. What am I going to do to find the phase shift?
Negative pi over 2 divided by 3, but because it's negative, it makes it a positive, so it would be pi over 6.
Awesome. So we are taking the opposite of C. C is a negative pi over 2, so that's going to make it a positive pi over 2. And then we divide by B, so we're dividing by 3, and that simplifies to pi over 6, positive. Dividing by 3 is the same as multiplying by 1/3. So that's where that comes. And then the vertical shift, we don't have one, do we? So we're not going to move our graph up or down. We could just put 0 in its place. Okay, let's do one more. Try this one on your own, and then I think we'll be ready for the assignment. All right, amplitude. Amplitude, Jalissa, what is it? Good. No flipping? No. Period. Alyssa, what do I do to find the period? 2 pi over 2. What's that reduced to? Pi. Very good. Phase shift. Cassidy, what do I do to figure out the phase shift?
Negative pi over 3 over 2.
What's that going to reduce to?
Negative pi over 6.
Good. And vertical shift. Candace, what's our vertical shift? -1, which means down 1. Very good. Okay, so today's assignment is going to be a worksheet where you've got, I think there's about 10 problems. You've got to find amplitude, period, phase shift, and vertical shift for all of them. Then tomorrow we'll talk about graphing those, possibly those, maybe another worksheet instead. So watch Google Classroom, those of you who are going to be gone, to see if it's just going to be those same or a different worksheet.
So